Okay, so we get it. Carbon is the backbone of life. We understand. But how it actually comes when we need to understand it when it comes to and biochemical interactions? What does it mean that carbon is the backbone of life? So, do you remember in the last lesson that I taught you how to actually draw a molecular structure, which we were talking about H2O, which is water? So H2O, you can draw it as the following. An O in the middle, connected to two hydrogen carbons. And you represent the covalent bonds with a line between the atoms. And the dots I draw over here represent the pair of electrons that is being shared between the atoms in order to complete the octet or in the valence shell of electrons of 1, the hydrogen, and 2, the oxygen atom. So we understood this point. In the previous lessons, I was also mentioning something called hydrocarbons. So hydrocarbons, as the name suggests, is just a compound made out of hydrogens and carbon atoms. So if we break it down, and I will give you a very basic example of carbon in the middle, and we said each carbon, because it has 4 electrons and it is in group 4 in the periodic table, as I showed you in previous lessons, carbon can create 4 covalent bonds with atoms surrounding it, which means that you can connect the carbon to 4 different hydrogen. This is one example. Or you connect the carbon to another carbon. And then this carbon, each one will be able to create 4 different covalent bonds as well. So we already have one between the carbons, and we can draw 3 more hydrogen around each carbon. So now we have 4 for this carbon and 4 for this carbon. And we can also do it with 3 carbons. For example, we will have a compound with 3 carbon atoms, and each one will get also 4. So now we have 3 carbons, and each one has 4 covalent bonds, because each carbon can create 4 covalent bonds thanks to the fact that it is group 4 and has 4 valence electrons. So it needs 4 extra electrons to create and to complete the octet role. But what does it mean? So all of the organic molecules, the backbone of it is made out of carbon. So amino acids, proteins, DNA, RNA, sugars, glucose, fructose, all the molecules you are used to hear and to learn from different sources, or you maybe heard about it in the past, are made from carbon connected to different elements. But the backbone is made out of carbon. So in this lesson, I'm going to explain how you can draw the structure and a basic way to actually name each compound that you are seeing. So hydrocarbons are divided into 2 main groups. We have saturated hydrocarbons, which are where the carbons have no double bonding between them and the hydrogen surrounds them fully. Let me show an example. So if we have 4 carbons, for example, and there is no double bonding, which we will explain in a second because we still didn't touch double bonding, each carbon will be surrounded with 4 atoms. And if all of the carbons are connected to 4 atoms each one, the molecule is saturated. So this is an example. I'm not going to draw the hydrogens, but just remember the lines represent the hydrogens. The molecule is saturated. However, an unsaturated hydrocarbon is when one of the carbons or more have a double bond or a triple bond between the different carbons. So we already mentioned that carbon can create 4 covalent bonds. But another thing that we are going to study is that the atoms, the electrons, can be shared between atoms, and they can be shared in couple of bonds, which means that you can see over here it's two electrons, a pair of electrons that is being shared between these two carbon atoms. But we can also have one of the bonds as an extra bond, an extra covalent bond between the carbon atoms instead of another atom. So we get two carbon atoms that each one has only 3 atoms connected to it. And it happens when we have a double bond between different carbon atoms inside a molecule. Don't let it overwhelm you. Just know the fact that you can have single bond, double bond, and triple bond between different atoms, and especially carbon atoms, because carbon can create 4 bonds with different atoms, but it can also create double and triple bonds among itself, among the different carbon atoms inside a molecule or other atoms. What does it mean? If we will count the amount of hydrogen we can assign this time, you will see that we are not able to assign 3 hydrogen atoms to each carbon atom, because you already have 2 carbon atoms with a double bond. So 2 pairs of electrons is already being taken. So this carbon is a regular carbon. There is a single covalent bond, and it means that we have 1, 2, 3 extra possible bonding that we can connect. This carbon already has 1, 2, 3 bonds. It means we can only have 1 extra hydrogen. This carbon is the same. 1, 2, 3 covalent bonds. So we can only add a single hydrogen. And this one has a single one. So it means we can add 1, 2, 3 hydrogen carbons. So this is the division between saturated hydrocarbons and unsaturated hydrocarbons. We could also have 3, like a triple bond in the molecule, and then we would get something pretty interesting. So check this out. If we had a triple bond over here, what does it mean? It means both of the carbon atoms can only have 1 extra bond, a covalent bond with an hydrogen atom. So we will get the following molecule. The following molecule is still hydrocarbon because it is only made out of carbon and hydrogen, but because it contains only 2 pairs, actual atoms around the center carbon, so this one carbon connected to 1, 2 atoms and not 4, it's an unsaturated hydrocarbon. So it's a very important thing to remember before we proceed to our next lesson. In our next lesson, we are going to discuss what happens and how we name the following molecule and how we actually draw them. So hydrocarbons are the very, very, very basic organic molecules we have in life and in general. Names from organic compounds you can think of is methane, ethane, propane, butane, and I'm sure you heard of some of them. For example, propane is gas that you have in the kitchen, and ethane is an alcohol is a product that you use in the industry. And you will see that in the future we are going to see how important and how basic hydrocarbons are in the organic environment. But in general, just remember for this lesson, hydrocarbons are compounds that are made out of carbon and hydrogen. They can be divided into 2 main groups: saturated hydrocarbons and unsaturated hydrocarbons. Saturated hydrocarbons are carbons chains that don't contain any double or triple bonds. Therefore, each carbon atom is connected to 4 other molecules. On the other hand, unsaturated hydrocarbons are carbon chains that contains 1 or more triple or double bonds between the different carbon atoms. Therefore, not all of the carbon atoms are being surrounded by 4 other atoms. And it's a very basic lesson that I wanted to do before we actually proceed to the next lesson. So I will see you next time.